Director of Innovation on our K-12 education policy team here at CAP. Just wanted to share a few quick housekeeping notes. Live captioning is available by clicking the closed caption button at the bottom of your screen. If you have questions during the event, please submit them using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And we also welcome you to engage in the conversation online using the hashtag #QualityEdChat. So before I explain some of what's in the proposal that we're talking about today, I just want to start with a couple stories to highlight why we think a long-term investment to help children and young adults recover from the pandemic, not just responding to it this year, is critical. An NBC News story from June highlighted the efforts of educators at a network of charter schools in Detroit to connect with students who hadn't been logging in. After repeated messages that went unreturned to one boy's father, a teacher visited the home and left a note asking someone to get in touch. And then they heard from the boy's 22-year-old brother. Their father died, and the brother was planning to raise his younger sibling, and he didn't know how to respond to repeated questions about their father. And in just the past week or so, data on college enrollment this fall has shown decreases that are concentrated in community colleges and among students from families with low incomes. These declines are happening even as the unemployment rate for young adults is hovering at approximately double the overall rate. A story in the Washington Post highlighted young adults trying to access a convenience store's broadband from the parking lot to do their coursework, and another who had to stop taking classes in California in order to focus on finding stable housing when her retail job disappeared. So how can the Opportunity and Counseling Corps help to bridge both of those crises? It would bring tens of thousands of young adults and other community members into high poverty schools and communities. They would serve as tutors, resident teachers, run after school programs, and in other roles to help students make up for the instructional time they've lost. These would be good jobs with benefits like health insurance that would build connections to the workforce for young adults while helping the younger peers in their communities. We know that interventions like tutoring have a strong research base behind them, with positive effects for students across grade levels, subject areas, group sizes, and the length of the tutoring program. This proposal would also support the hiring of tens of thousands of certified social workers, school counselors, and psychologists to address the trauma, mental health, and other emotional challenges children are experiencing as a result of the pandemic. We know that illness and death, job losses and financial insecurity, and isolation from support networks and activities are affecting many students' mental health and engagement with school. And even before the pandemic, ratios of students to social workers and counselors in high poverty schools were already way too high. Even with evidence of positive effects on a number of student outcomes, in 2019, 14 million students attended schools staffed with at least one police officer, but no counselor, nurse, psychologist, or social worker. We're very excited to start the event today with a conversation recorded a few days ago between CAP's Executive Vice President for Policy, Mara Rudman, and Colorado Governor Jared Polis. Prior to her now second stint at CAP, Mara was most recently Senior Vice President for Policy and Projects at Business Executives for National Security and led Quorum Strategies, a geopolitical strategic advisory firm. She has served in a number of government roles, including as Deputy Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs during both the Obama and Clinton administrations. Governor Jared Polis is an entrepreneur, education leader, public servant, and Colorado native. After launching several successful companies, including one out of his college dorm room, Governor Polis committed himself to making sure other Coloradans had the opportunity to pursue their dreams. He founded schools for at-risk students and new immigrants and started nonprofits to help veterans and entrepreneurs. Governor Polis served on the State Board of Education and represented Colorado's 2nd Congressional District, where he was rated the most effective member of the Colorado delegation. During his first term, Governor Polis has delivered universal free full-day kindergarten, signed a number of bills to save families money on healthcare, and made significant progress toward the goal of 100% renewable energy by 2040, all while cutting taxes for small businesses and investing in affordable housing and transportation. Now, the governor's primary focus is on strengthening the foundations of these equity-centered initiatives to protect Coloradans' health, economic livelihood, and social well-being during the COVID-19 pandemic. So let's hear from Mara and Governor Polis, and then I'll be back to kick off a wonderful panel discussion. Thank you.
Governor Polis, thank you so much for joining us here today. We really appreciate the opportunity to get to speak with you on what is a topic of great interest to us, and we know great interest to you, looking at opportunity and counseling core options and all the terrific things Colorado has been doing. So Governor, I want to start by asking you, understanding the context of the pandemic that we're all confronting. We've seen a lot of understandable concern for young adults whose education and entry into the workforce are being interrupted. This concern is part of what has fueled the interest in a big federal investment in something like the Opportunity and Counseling Core. We also know there are so many extra needs created by the pandemic, and perhaps core service could help address these in part. So in that context, really would love to hear about what you've been trying to do to leverage AmeriCorps and other existing strategies to meet some of the needs you're facing in Colorado.
Well, thanks, Mara. It's a pleasure to be with you and Cap. AmeriCorps members have really been a key part of our COVID-19 response in Colorado in several areas: virus containment, basic human needs like food delivery, and now, of course, what we'll be talking about, especially today, supporting the education of kids. You know, back in March, in the early days of the pandemic, our AmeriCorps members responded immediately by distributing meals at community centers and homeless shelters, people who were homebound. In March and April, they distributed, in fact, 21,000 meals to Coloradans that would have gone hungry otherwise. And as of just last week, there's been over 600 national service members and volunteers who have served or are serving in our COVID containment core. And AmeriCorps and Senior Corps members, they're doing contact tracing. In fact, 100 AmeriCorps members over summer have been hired to do the contact tracing work. And members also supported students and families with technology while the schools were closed, including helping to sanitize and distribute laptops, providing online tutoring and instruction. And this fall, we have about 250 members who are focused on supporting students' education. AmeriCorps members are doing socially distanced home visits to check on students. They're providing one-on-one literacy interventions and schoolwork help. They're assisting students and families to navigate the online learning portals, particularly first-generation students, non-English speaking families. And they're also giving individualized encouragement and connecting people to resources they need. So it's really absolutely critical, the role that AmeriCorps has played. And it's really a huge interest in service opportunities now. When we promoted 370 spots for our contact tracing, we got over 1,000 applications coming in.
That's so important, the work that you're doing and how you've started on this. Let me pick up from where you just left off, which is that you had many more applicants, about 2 to 3 times as many applicants as you had positions open. Does that tell you that there are more young adults out there that are looking for these kinds of opportunities? And if you had the ability to expand further, where would you go? What would you do?
Yeah, I think if we can provide that structure in place, there's a lot of people that are looking for something constructive, meaningful, helpful to do for a period of time. Connecting that to the unmet needs in education in our schools and youth services should really be an aspirational goal that we hope to really create that structure and implement that nationally.
Thanks, that's very helpful. Can we focus in on the school year, which I'm sure it's September and it's a pandemic and you can't help but be focused on that, I would imagine, a great deal of the time. As Colorado, every state, every school district in the country is trying to figure out how to safely start the school year and doing so in a number of different ways. Looking ahead, are you concerned, are you worried about kids in Colorado whose education has been disrupted, even as we are hopefully looking at moving through, or certainly we're in the management stage still of this pandemic, but as we're managing and as we're going forward, how do you look at how kids are managing in and outside of schools or through virtual learning, and the impact on students' health, for example, particularly, of course, including mental health impacts?
Well, we know that in many ways, this conversion to online schooling only exacerbated some of the existing achievement gaps for low-income students, for students of color, for immigrant students. And while some of the more affluent parents were able to have tutors and learning pods, we know that for many low-income students, it was a harder transition to online. And of course, for IEP students, many of them lost that support that they special ed students that they count on to meet their learning needs. So a program like the Opportunity Corps would just be transformational. It would have enormous impact on our ability to serve students no matter what comes, in class, hybrid, virtual, and help catch them up and close those achievement gaps during and after the pandemic.
And is a question of to be able to, we're obviously proposing a structure for the Opportunity Corps, but does this fit into the challenge of what you need to be able to expand and do more? In
Absolutely. When I think that
now?
what we could do as a state with the Opportunity Corps, the way that the transformational difference this would make, including on, as you indicated earlier, improving students' mental health, right? I mean, not just the folks who've lost somebody to COVID, but might have a parent out of work, or the stress of COVID, not seeing their friends. And with, left untreated, a lot of these challenges can make the recovery even more difficult for children. So I see this as really central. The Opportunity Corps is really central to a successful coronavirus response and recovery.
Thanks. So it sounds like from what you're saying that that we're talking both about obviously a tremendous service and needs of students to be filled. And then I'm wondering if you want to talk a little bit on the I don't want to say the flip side of that, but the connecting side, which is creating good jobs that can also introduce many young adults to career opportunities in education or in education and counseling. It's my sense that you are making those kinds of connections now in education and in other industries in Colorado. Would love to hear more about your take on that.
Yeah, one program I'm very excited about is a partnership between Cherry Creek School District and the University of Colorado, Denver, to help prepare future educators. It gets high school sophomores involved, provides high school and college courses with the goal of becoming a paid paraprofessional in that student's senior year. Transferable, aligned college credit, they're guaranteed admission to University of Colorado, Denver. And AmeriCorps in Colorado has done a great job of introducing young people to careers in education. And then another great Colorado thing, environmental conservation. They do trail work, they help maintain our great outdoors. These are real pathway programs where students can learn about careers in education, in outdoor work. Maybe some of them go on to become rangers for parks and wildlife, that are good growing sectors and can help make sure that kids have the opportunities to pursue them. So, without really federal commitment in these areas, it's difficult for Colorado alone or any state alone to grow these kinds of programs, particularly in these ages of very difficult state budgets. So federal programs like AmeriCorps really offer additional benefits, which only can be offered federally, like the Siegel Education Award, that allow members to gain additional education and have successful careers.
Thanks, Governor. Can you describe a little bit about why you feel, or in Colorado's experience, why it has been important to expose students to careers they may be interested in, what it is about having these opportunities? You talk about the Pathways program. Who are you bringing in that might not otherwise be in the mix?
Yeah, really we have apprenticeships, we have dual and concurrent enrollment programs. It's about showing kids what's possible and giving them a clear pathway to that career. Many programs can complete high school, concurrently receive an associate's degree, immediately go out and earn a good living. If they do go on to college, they might only need 2 or 3 years at a 4-year university to get a bachelor's degree. And just really showing, especially first generation college goers, folks without that legacy in the family, there's a wide world of opportunity for those who pursue it. And here's the tools you need to get there.
And so it sounds like from what you're saying, this is really certainly what you've done in Colorado and what you could do more of with the right opportunities on the federal side is really preparing for the workforce that Colorado needs, that the country needs in the future.
Absolutely. It's not only good for the young people involved, it's good for our economy, good for the private sector. Really, where are these skilled workers going to come from? Should the burden fall on companies to train them, or can we do this in high school while they're with us anyway? Can they be prepared for the good paying jobs of the future? And the answer is yes, through a combination of apprenticeships. We work with CareerWise and the Swiss model. Many students are in apprenticeships their junior and senior year. We're trying to expand that. Programs like the Cherry Creek collaboration with the University of Colorado Denver gets kids earning money in their senior year of high school as paraprofessionals with a pathway for them to become full licensed educators.
Those are just terrific opportunities and wonderful ways forward. Governor, a few weeks ago, you announced the Response, Innovation, and Student Equity Education Fund, which, as I understand it, uses a portion of the state funding that you would have received through the CARES Act, which was, of course, an earlier legislative effort from the springtime. We're still waiting, of course, for the HEROES Act, the House version of a much bigger package. But I understand that you've used a portion of state funding through the CARES Act to respond to the coronavirus crisis. Can you explain to us a little bit about how you're hoping to, what you're hoping to be able to spur in the state's K-12 school system and the higher education institutions, tribes, and early childhood councils with these awards? Could you describe maybe what you've done a little bit to us?
So Colorado certainly prioritized education in our use of CARES Act money. We distributed $510 million directly to the community colleges, the school districts, the high schools, our boards of cooperative services, we call them BOCES. We got it right out the door. That went out formulaically. The purpose of this set aside of about $32 million is to fund the schools that were disproportionately affected by the COVID crisis, right? So everybody needs help. Budget went out, everybody's budgets are hurt. But we also know that often those who had the least, for instance, unemployment is highest in our service sector, low income sector. Those who were disproportionately impacted by both the health impact, meaning people were lost and hospitalized and out of work, but also broader, the economic impact of COVID-19 is where we're focusing our RISE funds. While COVID has been an enormous challenge everywhere, it also presents an opportunity to do things differently, especially for our highest needs students and families for whom it wasn't even working well enough before coronavirus. So we're particularly excited about student-centered learning, partnerships between K-12 and higher education that move the needle on workforce training, college accessibility, affordability. So we're really encouraging that kind of innovation here in Colorado to serve the students that were disproportionately impacted from coronavirus. Building it back the way it was before isn't enough, because we know that many students and families were falling through the holes. So we need to build it back better than ever.
Thanks, Governor. So well said. Can you describe, obviously Colorado, under your leadership, has had a number of terrific good ideas on how to move forward in this area. And it sounds like you are navigating with everything you can to be able to put those ideas into action. Based on what you said earlier, clearly federal support is key. What kind of federal support do you think you really need to address the crisis that we're confronting now educationally, and as you say, build back stronger, better, really looking forward to get to where we need to go? What do you think that would take on the federal level?
Yeah, so Colorado and the states need federal help, right? We need significantly more investment to meet the immediate needs to respond to the pandemic, and the Opportunity Corps, like CAP envisions, would go a long way to really help Colorado and other states build back better than before. In addition, Congress, of course, should pass the Cultivating Opportunity in Response to the Pandemic Through Service, or the CORE Act. That would double the number of AmeriCorps positions to help in a wide variety of areas, provide 600,000 service opportunities nationwide over 3 years to unemployed youth, right, meeting a real need. Look who unemployment predominantly affects, and how can we align that with an investment to build a better future. These positions could support a wide variety of response and recovery efforts that are really localized and based on community need. Even in Colorado, we're a big state. The need's different in Trinidad and Adams County, in Grand Junction, in Denver. It could be expanding food pantry capacity, mentoring and tutoring at-risk students, bridging health inequities, improving trails and tourism infrastructure to help the economy, screening and testing for COVID or other health conditions, so much more. So now's really the time for this federal investment in our future. When we're talking about an investment in young people, that's one of the best investments with the best return on investment that we can have as a society.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, both for joining us here today, Governor, for this discussion, but really for all that you have been doing in your state in this area, and for pushing the rest of us, many other states, to follow your lead and to look at innovative ways that federal funding can be used for this critical investment. So
well, we wouldn't
you.
be as far along as we are without AmeriCorps, and we look forward to partnering to really see that our youth in the right structure with the right way of doing it nationally are a big part of building America back even better than before.
Absolutely. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you, Mara.
Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you so much to Governor Polis and to Mara. It was great to hear about the efforts underway in Colorado to leverage national service programs like AmeriCorps, but also sobering to realize how many more children and young adults federal investment could reach. And now, without further ado, I'm very excited to welcome our panel to the conversation. If everyone could turn their cameras on, that would be great. All right, thank you all. And so rather than going through introductions right now, I'll kind of do that as I direct questions each of your way. And so my first one is for AJ Gutierrez, who is the co-founder, vice chair, and chief of marketing and communications for Saga Education. Saga is an evidence-based personalized tutoring model and AmeriCorps program. And I guess, AJ, I'm going to actually rewind a little bit before your time with Saga to when you started off your career. As someone who participated as a core member in City Year during the Great Recession, can you talk a little bit about your individual experience and what sort of benefits there were to you in your career?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so, I was born and raised in Boston, Massachusetts, in a Villa Victoria, which is a Puerto Rican community. It's a low-income community with a single mother with 3 kids. And although my mom really valued education and really pushed me to do well academically, I struggled as a student. And that really changed for me when I attended high school for many reasons. But one major factor is due to the fact that I had to work with tutors who all helped me build my foundational skills, but also to connect with me and also with my family. And in addition to that, service was always an important part of my upbringing and in my community, not only in terms of serving with our military, but also with volunteerism and community organizing. So I say that to you because service was always at top of my mind when I was thinking about opportunities for myself, after graduating from college. But at the time when I graduated from college in 2010, we're still going through the economic recession. And so myself and my peers are looking for alternative experiences for ourselves. And, AmeriCorps was very appealing in the student loan deferment and forbearance and forgiveness was also a really great incentive for us. And in terms of how it changed my trajectory as a professional, I was at the time really interested in going to law school, but having the opportunity to serve in the community where I grew up and in the schools, it really strengthened my my admiration for the education space in the sector. So I decided to stay involved.
And what did you learn that as you were helping to get the Saga models and the sort of precursor to that? So from your experience that helped, what had been incorporated into Saga to help other young people get their careers off to a good start?
I think the first thing that we recognize, Alan Saffer and I, the co-founder of Saga, is that it's not just young people who can have a tremendous impact when it comes to service and getting involved. And so when we decided to disseminate the tutoring model that started at Match Education in 2004 to other traditional district schools, we opened the opportunity to mid-career individuals and retirees as well. And so it was an amazing opportunity to bring people together from all walks of life, 21 to over 70 years old. And so that type of intergenerational collaboration is not something you see every day. And we found that to be very important for the members involved. And for the young people who are involved, it creates a pathway for meaningful impact and an opportunity for them to immerse themselves in the community and working with diverse teams, especially with students and families coming from different cultural, ethnic, and religious backgrounds, for instance. It also is a really great professional development tool for our service members. And of course, there's more we would like to do in this area in the near future. But it could be a great potential to use these talented people as a talent pipeline to schools. And something we've done at Saga has been very intentional about the coaching and feedback we provide our members. And that's important, especially for rookie educators, where we provide informal observations throughout the week and also formal observations weekly to all of our members. And so that's very valuable for our service members to get accustomed to feedback, to develop their growth mindset, which is very valuable as they pursue new opportunities for themselves.
That's great. Thank you so much, AJ. Next, I'd like to turn to Huiying B. Chan, who is a research and policy analyst at the NYU Metro Center for Research on Equity and the Transformation of Schools. So I guess what does your research and your experience working with grassroots organizers and as a grassroots organizer yourself tell us about the effects on children from this coronavirus crisis and the still ongoing disruptions to education that are happening all over the country?
Thank you, Neil. I would say that what we're seeing right now, especially in New York City, that's been an epicenter of the virus, is the massive trauma that students are facing as a result of the pandemic, and especially Black and Brown youth that make up over 80% of the 1.1 million students in the New York City public school system. We're seeing, in general in New York, almost everyone knows someone who either got sick from COVID or passed away from COVID, and as a result, you have young people coming back into school, and when teachers are asking them, what are you worried about for the school year? You have some students saying that they're worried because they just lost a parent recently, that they're worried they might get infected with COVID. They're worried about parents who are still having to go into work every day as essential workers. And so what you see is not only the inequities of the public school system prior coming back now and worsening now, but you have just a lot of crisis at hand and a lot of lack of resources, especially with all of the budget cuts in order to meet those crises adequately. And so what we're seeing is that on the local level, the impact of COVID is really widespread, and on national level, the CDC just reported that majority of the teenagers that are passing away from COVID are Black and Latinx and Indigenous teenage young people, which is really tragic. And so we are just seeing just a massive need especially not only for the academic support, but for the counseling and the socio-emotional support, and for healing both for youth and also families where parents have to now be teachers for their students at home without adequate resources. We're seeing that at the local level here, there's now a shortage of technology devices and an expectation that everyone has internet access when that's not the actual reality. And you have multiple children sharing the same iPad, or you have multiple kids trying to balance home duties with their school life. And so it's a lot that we're going to have to deal with, both at the local and at the federal level. And that's just some of what we're seeing here on the ground.
Yeah. How are groups, organizing to try to overcome some of those barriers and connect supports to kids and families in need.
So what we're seeing, which has always been true historically, is community showing up for each other. When there isn't that government aid and where there isn't that local aid. At the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of groups were providing mutual aid for each other. I work closely with the Coalition for Educational Justice, which is a coalition here of Black and Brown parents leading different organizations throughout the city coming together for public education. And at the beginning, people were raising funds for groceries for parents who just lost their jobs and couldn't provide food for families, raising funds for the undocumented communities here specifically that didn't receive any of the stimulus funding or checks, and really showing up for each other in that way. And we have been consistently meeting with the Department of Education leadership here in New York City to hold them continuously accountable to the inequities that continue to worsen and surface during the pandemic. And what we're also working on now, which is a really exciting project, is the project of Liberation School, which is the community really taking education into their own hands. And Liberation School, coming out of the coalition, is a free virtual online school that provides workshops including academic support for parents, ethnic studies classes for youth, healing sessions, recruiting volunteers, social workers, and therapists to provide that culturally competent care that folks are really needing, that we're not seeing being met within the education system itself. And so projects like that as well are growing in New York and also across the country that really give me hope during this time.
That is wonderful efforts to hear about. And I guess just one final part. So, as the new school year kicks off, I know you touched on the technology and to both devices and internet access. But what are the biggest barriers kids are facing? I know the start of the school year in New York City has been delayed. But in addition to the technology, what are some of the biggest barriers kids are facing?
So in addition to the technology, I would say it's having to deal with just months of compounded trauma that just hasn't been met with proper care or resources, both from the pandemic and also from the continuous showing of white supremacy at the killing of Black community members. And so we're seeing elementary school students having questions about what is happening like under Trump and with the elections coming up. There's just a lot of anxiety and fear and worry. In addition to having worry about completing their schoolwork, it's almost impossible to be able to do all of that and succeed under measures of grades without actual investment into these communities and without the social emotional support. And I would say the other thing that we're seeing especially is even within the population, students with disabilities, students who are English language learners are facing even more of the brunt of who is left behind. We have parents telling us that up until now, they still haven't received communication on how to support their child on their child's IEPs. And some families that don't speak English, for example, just haven't received communications like from their school to this day because they haven't been able to be reached, compounded with the technology issues. And so that's just some of what we're seeing now that we're trying to address, and that's going to carry forward into the school year.
Wow. Thank you, Hui-Ying. So next I want to turn to Thomas Showalter. He is the executive director of the National Youth Employment Coalition and an expert on education and workforce policy. And Thomas, what are some of the effects on young adults who graduate into or enter the workforce during a recession, that we've learned from the past few decades?
Sure. Thanks for having me in this event. And actually, it was just hitting me. listening to the video with Governor Polis, how amazing it is to have a governor who's like a real education wonk. I think he would embrace that label in a state house. Having worked with him and his staff when I was on Capitol Hill, it's just amazing to hear a governor talking clearly about senior corps versus America. You know, oh, amazing. Anyway, yeah, I think as we've heard from AJ and Huiying, like adolescence is, recessions don't have discrete effects on young people. It's not like young people appear at high school at age 14 or appear at age 18 or 22 looking for a job. These are, adolescence is connected to family dynamics, to community, to the environment, to policy. And things like early work experience starting in the teen years are really important for young people to start getting familiar with the workplace, getting the kind of soft skills that they're going to need to succeed in the economy. And of course, the Great Recession hit young people the hardest around the world and in the United States, and we're seeing the same effects. These kinds of dynamics are understandable. Young people tend to work in the sectors that are hit hardest by recessions, and especially this one. They also are likely to be the last hired and the first fired. So these, we're in the opportunity youth space, that is the young people who are out of school and out of work. We estimate that all the progress we've made over the last decade has disappeared in the last 6 months in terms of bringing down the rate of youth disconnection. But it's really, these recessions are spikes, but they're also part of a long run decline in youth attachment to the labor force. About 43% of teens were working in 2000. Today, it was about 26% in 2014. And for older youth, 20 to 24-year-olds, you would think would be more likely to be out there, fell from 70% in 2000. It's now probably closer to 50%. And it might be even lower than that because of the pandemic. And as with everything else, the pandemic is going to affect Black and brown young people. It's going to hit them harder. It's going to hit high poverty communities harder. And we really need some public sector supports to turn this around.
So segued kind of into my follow-up there. So what are some of the support? Like what do the young adults that are, ideally entering the workforce, what do they need right now? And, how can or have national service type programs and initiatives played a part in that?
Of course, yeah. The good news is that young adults need the same things now that they've always needed, and we know what those things are. We have decades of evidence for how to connect all kinds of young people to education and employment, even if they've experienced disruption, even if they've experienced trauma. I think a lot of those folks who are at this event, are going to be familiar with those, the access to early work experience, relevant secondary education, connections to caring adults. But I wanted to pick up on something Governor Polis mentioned, which was that sense of meaning and purpose, which I think we deny to Black and brown young people and poor young people a lot, and is a critical part of adolescence. And something like this great proposal is a great opportunity for all kinds of young people to be of service. We actually know that opportunity youth are more likely than other young people to want to work in the nonprofit sector, to want to give back to their communities. But the reality is that a lot of these positions just don't pay enough. So we need either a national service or public sector employment kind of model for giving young people with lived experience the opportunity to come into schools and do really critical work that we've known that school counseling has been in crisis for decades, and this is a really critical role that they can fill.
Thank you so much, Thomas, for joining us and for that. And now I want to turn to our final panelist this afternoon. That is Dr. Renata Hedrington-Jones. She is a faculty member at Walden University, a member of the National Association of Black Social Workers, and she spent decades of her career working in social work in public schools in Virginia. We're now 6+ months into this crisis, and in many places a month or so into the new school year. What needs are you hearing from your former colleagues in the work that you're doing and your peers at the National Association, seeing from students, as the new school year kicks off? Oh, yeah, I think you're still muted. You want to just unmute there? There you go.
Unfortunately, we have a consistent communication with our communities, and we also have collegiate chapters. So that makes our insight a little broader. And when you talk about school districts and children, educators were trained to be educators and not mental health or clinicians. And so they tend to cross lines that they are not competent in. And so they like to ignore those children who come to school or who are in situations where some form of trauma has transpired. You tend to, when I grew up, you went to school, you lived with your teachers in the same community, so there was a relationship and a connection. You don't have that now. So people aren't in tune or real sensitive to the children. The children are afraid. They don't know the right questions or the questions to ask to get the answers. So we make an attempt as members of the communities and Black social workers, and we encourage others to develop a relationship so we can talk to those persons who are directly in contact with those children. But parents and children need to trust people through this journey we're currently in. So we have to give them the knowledge, and not in a lot of formal and technical terms, but make it understandable. Explain, I have a 3-year-old grandson, and he knows when he comes in the house, he has to wash his hands, he washes his face, etc. So we have to teach that. And we have to explain to kids so they're not afraid, because he was afraid of the mask. So as social workers, we go through a process of developing that rapport with those children, the families. The educators need to be taught how to identify those children that are having a traumatic response to what's going on. It really concerns us that children are expected to go into a school building or remotely engage in educational tasks, and no one's asked them how they're feeling. Children are very clear on how they feel. They can tell you when they're frightened. They can tell you when they don't feel comfortable. They can tell you when they don't understand. And then we've taken a gigantic leap and placed children into homes for homeschooling or remote learning, into homes that we have consistently said were not great homes. And by that, I mean, if you have an 8th grade parent who's teaching a 10th grade student, where's your successful outcome? So we have to go in and offer those parents that support where they can express that need. Because one, they don't want people to think they're illiterate. They don't want to take people they don't care. They need some help. So we need to be able to provide that help. So we have to reach to the communities. And one way of doing that is relationships with the faith-based community. Because churches are still having services, whether it be in the cars in the parking lot or virtual. So we have to have those partnerships with other agencies where you network constantly. It's real interesting. Schools are closed, but courts are not closed. Juvenile court is still going on. So we have to get in there and talk about what's the difference in those two entities and what we are teaching children. When are they important? Because this alone, and children kind of listen to the news and they listen to the conversations that we're having. So we have to embrace them, communicate with them, and then teach their parents how to have these same conversations. We tend to not acknowledge the trauma that's involved. One day you were in school, one teacher put it best on MSN a few weeks ago. She said when they left school, it was March. They walked back into their classrooms and it was like going back in time because they weren't able to clean their rooms. So if you can imagine how children are feeling. So it is our role to go into those communities, whether we are virtual, doing drive-bys, communicating out the car windows, to talk to them. And we try to have relationships with those clients. We do have telehealth and virtual interventions. A lot of parents may not be comfortable with that because we still have community taboos regarding mental health. So we have to collaborate with schools. We have my chapter here in Richmond. We've extended ourselves to the school system several times, and they have never responded in any form or fashion for help that's free. And all parents have to do is sign the consent. So we have to put the word out in the communities, what's available, how we help, and what they need. They are best to tell us what they need. So NABSW for over 50 years has made a conscientious effort to bridge the gaps and strengthen and empower the people that we work with. And we have to continue that during this time, because when kids come back to school, the behavioral responses are going to be the pandemic, lack of socialization and interaction, communication, etc. So I gave parents tips like get the children up in the morning as if they were going to school, wash their face, brush their teeth, get ready for school, and keep that structure in your home as much as possible. Don't deviate from the structure, because when they go back to school, then we'll have the problems. And it's as the same information is good for inner city kids as it is for rural and suburban kids. Because if you look at all of the major violence things that have happened in America in schools, they generally were suburban and rural children. So we need to look at all of the components of the problem and know that the pandemic is going to leave multiple scars. So we've been doing virtual webinars and meetings and talking about the pandemic and what our response will be to the communities that we serve. And so we have a pretty good response to that. We have to make sure families continue to maintain a sense of self, a sense of purpose. Self-esteem is going to be key because many people have lost their jobs. And we're going to have to reconvene the village, because we are going to have to work with people who don't have, because the eligibility system right now for unemployment and public assistance, it's terrible. So we think that all of these partnerships will work.
Yeah. And just to follow up a little, I mean, I know certainly it's wonderful work that you're describing, and you know, there'd be hope that the schools would be trying to leverage you know, additional you know, support like you're talking about. But we also know that schools are, you know, one of the largest mental health providers for children. And so, you know, what will be needed in, you know, for schools specifically to be able to meet, you know, all the needs and challenges you're discussing when, you know, when, knock on wood, and you know, soon that kids are back in school full time.
Now, I've worked in a couple of school settings in different states, and I've not seen schools that invested in mental health. You have school social workers, and according to the School Social Work Association of America and NASW specifically, not School Social Work of America, but schools, NASW, the student to social work ratio should be around 300, 250, 300. They far exceed that. Social workers and school psychologists are most of the time placed in schools to do testing and evaluations for special education eligibility. Guidance counselors, who now are called or want to be called school counselors, don't have clinical training. And so what they're doing in Virginia is you take 3 classes, now you can call yourself a school counselor and provide that mental health support. You haven't been taught the primary basics. And I know Mara was talking to the governor about the services, et cetera. You have to have trained people. Everybody cannot practice social work. The social workers fought for 25 years for title protection. You have to graduate with certain curriculums, certified by, credentialed by certain entities in order to move forward. So that's the first thing we have to do, is make certain that we have qualified people to provide these mental health services. Sending people to the office is not mental health intervention. And you cannot have a social worker responsible for 500 students' attendance and evaluations. When is the clinical intervention happening? Long ago, when I first started 30 years ago in school social work, we had a licensed clinical social worker between every 2 schools, because they knew the school social worker does attendance, they do assessments, and they sit in team meetings most of the day. So people need to get the real idea of what school social work responsibilities are. They are very, very far beyond the mental health. The other thing is students can obtain mental health intervention if they have an IEP with it written in the IEP and it's Medicaid eligible. That's discriminatory because only Medicaid eligible students are eligible for those services. So then you still have to bring in an outside provider, and they have to be certified to take private insurances. That is what is the difficult thing, because everybody who needs mental health intervention does not receive Medicaid. So those are the things that people need to be aware of in terms of what mental health supports students can have.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. And I just want to pause for 1 second to remind folks joining us online, if you have questions, we would love to hear them. I have a few more to ask the group, but there's the Q&A tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen there. So please send in questions if you have them. I guess next I want to circle back to AJ here, and can you tell us a little bit about what Saga's tutoring model looked like before the pandemic, and some of the evidence, not just about your own program, but about tutoring as an intervention in schools that as it's been studied over the years.
So Neil, I mean, in the United States, millions of students are behind grade level, and that number will continue to grow as COVID-19 continues to disrupt our learning landscape nationwide. And what's particularly troubling is that once students fall behind, it can be very difficult to help them catch up. And so I say this because there's just a tremendous amount of urgency to be proactive and put the right evidence-based support in front of students so that they can thrive. And a strategy that has consistently demonstrated strong efficacy is high dosage tutoring. And so where tutoring is part of the regular school day as its own class, in addition to core classroom instruction. So it's to supplement the work of teachers, not to replace teachers. And so if you can imagine a large classroom full of students working alongside tutors in small groups, and a student will work alongside his or her tutor every day throughout the entire duration of the school year, which is why we coined the term high dosage tutoring. And so the University of Chicago Urban Education Lab has conducted randomized control research studies on this approach since 2013 in Chicago and elsewhere. They expect to publish a new paper about the randomized control research study results to date pretty soon. And in those randomized control research studies, about 95% of the students are African American or Hispanic. I think 90% were eligible for your reduced price loan involved in the study. So we served 9th and 10th grade students in Chicago, specifically in math. And we saw significant improvements in standardized test score performance. It was a 0.37 standard deviation effect size over the control group, which according to University of Chicago, roughly means that students in the treatment group had triple the math gain over the students in the control group. There were also decreases in math course failure rates, about 63%, and also spillover effect in other subjects who were not tutored. It's about 27% reduction in course failure rates in non-tutor subjects. And all these results are very encouraging. And looking beyond Saga, what we're doing is demonstrating what is possible when you make tutoring as a part of the way schools operate. And when you think about the cost effectiveness or growing or scaling tutoring long term, you don't have to do it for every single student and every grade level every year. I mean, you can embed this level of personalization for students, at 1 or 2 critical growth years as part of their normal K-12 experience. And by doing so, you can significantly shift academic outcomes and graduation rates for students.
That's great. Thank you, AJ. And I want to turn back to Renata a little bit. So that, the two parts of our proposal are one, the kind of opportunity core side, which would be tutors and other, young adults that would be, maybe serving roles like resident teachers or helping run other programs in schools. And then the second is, investment in, certified social workers and school counselors and psychologists. And I know you alluded to this a little bit in terms of some of the student to counselor or student to social worker ratios, Renata, but could you speak about some of the research that's out there about the importance of those roles and the challenges to get more of them into schools?
So the greatest challenge is bringing not necessarily academic ready, but prepared students, and students that we know. I'm from Chicago, raised in DC. Every Friday, practically, as a high school student, at a football or basketball game, someone was injured and many passed away. We could talk about it to each other, but there was never an opportunity for a professional to help you process that. And I say that to say our children need a means to process. I watch a lot of ID, the yellow tape. If you can imagine going to school, the yellow tape in your neighborhood should never be a norm. You should have an opportunity when you go to school to have to talk to somebody. If you're feeling emotionally tangled, you need to be able to say that, and that person needs to be readily available. We have been made to believe if you see a psychiatrist, social worker, or counselor, that you have done something wrong. It's a taboo. You shouldn't take medicine. We have to embrace the differences that we have in the children and know when you go into that office with that social worker, psychologist, or counselor, that it's going to help you and it is not to harm you. So we have to change the taboos regarding those services. We also have to impress upon educators that this is not general knowledge that you speak of. I've had so many times to remind teachers of HIPAA, their responsibilities to confidentiality, because in all practical purposes, schools is one of the safest places our children can go every day. And they should be made comfortable, they should be happy, and so the policy should direct that. So I think it's a mind change that because people say schools can't do everything, but schools have children more hours in a day than most parents. We could have the greatest impact on them by the time we spend with those children, especially if we are able to provide that emotional support. Children cannot watch their mothers or fathers get beat up all night long, then come to school and sit still and learn. They can't watch the people on the drugs and the fights and the police and then come to school and sit down and learn. And if any school district, whenever you have the opportunity to allow your child to go out of the school district to another school that's safer, the scores are better, that is what the majority of the people who can will do. So we shouldn't have to go from school to school to have a great education. So that emotional support gives children all sorts of messages. I sit in the back of the room because I'm slow. They put me in the tape box because I can't. So as therapists and clinicians, we're the ones to train those teachers how to communicate best with those students so as not to harm them anymore, because trauma is very real. And even in affluent communities, it's just different. It's different because they have money. But we ignore the problems that children have and we hide them. So it's not like we're going to blame and blast everybody's business, but we need to have children be comfortable, calm down, so they can learn. And I guarantee you, if we did that consistently, our children would do better in the environments that we create, because we shouldn't allow certain things into the classroom with our children. And so you have to embrace it. One of the secretaries used to say, I claim, when the children misbehave, I told them I was their cousin. You know my big mama, yep. And you're gonna come in here and you're gonna do your work. No problems, no disrespect, no ill-manneredness. And people say that's just because they like you because you're older. No, it's because they saw me establish a standard of expectation as high as you could do. And I think that's real important. And I think we need to know how to be better listeners when children talk. They may talk in circles, but you can eventually smooth it all out and understand what they're saying, from being abused to being uncomfortable in the classroom with a teacher that doesn't like them. So we have to be, and you have to be trained to do that.
I think you said you wanted to add, build on that a little bit.
Yeah, I would just add that in addition to those challenges, we're seeing that one of the challenges to getting more counselors is obviously the allocation of funding in the budgets. And it's also connected to that a bigger mindset shift, as Dr. Renata mentioned, of the need for people like school security officers and police officers over counselors and social workers and therapists. And in order to get to where we need to be, there needs to be a questioning on a great scale of that mindset. Why is it that Black kindergarteners are suspended over 3 times more likely than white students?
Yes.
And preschoolers and Black girls especially, it's even worse with the rates of suspension that they're facing just for being young kids. And why is it that if a student with a behavioral issue happens to be acting out in class, that there isn't a trained mental health professional to come in to respond, and instead they're taken away from the classroom and deprived of further learning? And we also have to question, like in moments of conflict, both in school and in a greater societal level, when people are facing interpersonal conflicts, like why are officers called in to intervene in those cases rather than people trained in conflict de-escalation, especially people from those communities who, as Dr. Nada said, like students may know, they may know them in the community and they can trust them more, versus all of these outside officers being hired who often don't live in the communities to essentially patrol the schools and also the neighborhoods.
Yes.
So that's just another issue I wanted to raise.
And so one more thing, Neil, I don't know if you guys know about the Social Work Reinvestment Act.
I know a little bit, but please share
The
with the audience.
Social Work Reinvestment Act would answer that call for social workers with pay, going into different entities, the qualifications and credentialing, and do loan forgiveness like for teachers to recruit more social workers to come into practice. And so, I mean, since I've been sitting on this call, one of my NABSW members just passed her licensing exam. And I know in the last 4 months, about 6 of them have passed. They're ready to work wherever, but the pay has to be comparable to what they can earn. So rather than, and you cannot have I read a bachelor's degree to provide extensive therapeutic services to the children. So you have to have a master's degree to be a school social worker, which is you're clinically prepared. So it's not like they don't have, I think I would love a restructuring in the schools for services, because then you could work right through when we do stuff with the special ed kids who are just going into coaching situations for work, and they go right through. We can't have that interruption, because emotionally that's supportive and they grow to be independent of a therapist. But we have to start at those right places.
Right. Next, want to turn to Thomas to start this one off. So how can we make sure that, you know, if efforts are successful and there is something like the Opportunity and Counseling Corps, how can we make sure that these job opportunities to do things like tutoring or other supports in schools, that they're good jobs?
Yeah, that's one of the key questions here. I mean, I want to underline, what's come up in a couple ways in this conversation, which is that these communities that we're talking about are strong and resilient. These young people that we're talking about are whole and amazing. But we all need a place to process. We all need a place of safety, and too many young people in our country don't have that place of safety. We all need to be on a healing journey in this time, in this year, and too many young people don't have that place of safety to start from. So that's one of the opportunities with a bill like this, for me, is just to get more caring adults in our schools, point blank period. There's a lot of, as Dr. Anand is describing, we need highly trained social workers and clinicians in schools, but we also need tutors and mentors, and we need credible messenger models to work with young people who are gang and violence impacted. There are so many kinds of roles that we have to be filled in our schools and in our communities. In terms of how to structure something like this, I personally think the key is that these roles need to be living wage jobs, essentially. That could be structured as an AmeriCorps slot with a significantly increased living stipend and different education awards, or it could be as a federal government employee or a state employee, a public sector employee. But I think the main thing is to make it so that any young person with lived experience can see themselves in one of these roles. Another thing that's important in any of these, in a proposal like this, and I think increasingly for a long time on Capitol Hill, we've used all these we've talked about low-income kids or disadvantaged youth, or we use all these euphemisms for talking about kids of color, because we know who the young people who need the most support in our country are. We just don't want to name it. And we use all these euphemisms to get around it. So I think it's really important to be explicit in who we're talking about, and really explicit in how we target funds. And then another piece that I think is really important, and that has also been kind of alluded to, is a proposal like this has to fit into an overarching vision for how we see young people transitioning to adulthood, which we don't really have right now in this country. We have the efforts of a million different school districts and states, and in some places you get access to early work experience, and in some places you don't. In some states you can have affordable higher education options, in some places you don't. In some places you can get access to apprenticeships, in some places you can't. In some parts of our country we have exploding youth homelessness crises, and in some of those places there might be services for you or there might not be. We're reaping the fruit of a lot of systems that are dysfunctional because they've never been funded in the way they were supposed to, and they've never really been intended to work together or to actually provide universal supports for all young people. So for me, a big part of what I've been talking about and going to be talking about for the next 6 months is what's that new vision for how young people transition to adulthood? What are the baseline sets of expectations we have for what young people should experience in school? What options they should have for post-secondary education or employment? When should they have those options? And I think this, a proposal like this is a great piece of a vision for that, and offers a great opportunity for young people to begin giving back to the communities they grew up in, and for us to change, who's working in our schools and who we see as professionals and people with wisdom.
Right.
But it has to fit into that larger vision, and I think the federal government is that's the place where the conversation really needs to happen, is with Congress, and then with the president.
Yeah. Kuei Ying, I'll point this follow up to you before I go to an audience question. And that's like, how do we make sure that these jobs are not just serving students that are, in communities most affected during the crisis, but that they're going to the young adults most affected and in those same communities that have seen, job loss and health effects through the coronavirus crisis?
Yeah, I think there's two core pieces with that. The first is in implementation of a program like this, it needs to be in partnership with grassroots communities and organizers, and also through genuine relationships with folks who are stakeholders in the schools and districts themselves. And I would say another step further from that is in the actual inception of the program from the beginning, it needs to have folks from those communities in the leadership positions.
Yes.
So young people deciding the shape and the scope of the program, being asked for consistent feedback and compensated for doing so, and using their time in that way. And also then to the actual implementation and outreach for them to be spearheading and leading that, rather than folks from outside the community, sometimes with higher degrees that are seen as like more credible. And I would say the other piece of it too is to make sure that the people who join the corps are actually trained in culturally responsive education, in how to facilitate like tutoring sessions, wellness sessions, in ways that center those who are most marginalized and have an equity framework. I think those are all critical pieces that we can't assume that just because someone gets in and accepts the job offer that they have those competencies. And especially with programs like these where it's framed as people going in to serve the highest needs communities, there has to be an emphasis on not having a deficit lens when providing the support. So not seeing yourself as someone who is coming in to help someone and to serve these people and to do good, but that actually the communities have the knowledge themselves to provide that for themselves, and the people who are in these roles are kind of supplementing and bringing to light individual students, family members as talents in order to make that change happen that we want to see in the education system and on a societal level.
Yes, I agree.
Thank you for that. And I'll give one more plug. If folks have questions, please share them with us. And with that, I'll go to the first one of those that I have here. And it's, we can start with Renata here, that you had mentioned, that increasing access to mental health supports for students via, telehealth and virtual platforms is a, is something in opportunity or a potential way to help connect with students. And so I was wondering if you could, this audience members, if you could provide any, examples of the expansion of those, telehealth sort of services, and if you would anticipate that, expanding beyond, these COVID times of school closure to, get those supports to students, maybe in rural communities, or, other communities that may not have, be able to hire their own, clinical support, through social workers or psychologists.
So the most wonderful thing about social workers is that we are resource banks. And I always teach my students, always make connections that you can use later for your clients. So those parents or people in rural areas, if it is something that they need to be connected, our first step would to find that. You always have people that are willing to give, share, donate. So I always keep a bank of those people. And so you pull in those people, have people to help train those people so they can have a portion of the reality that's going to cause them to be connected virtually. And telehealth, although many of us like myself don't like it, because I'm not that computer person, it's available. And most practitioners, social workers, medical doctors are offering it. And it could, you could even have group sessions, be very creative with what goes on. and work really well with those clients. And so that works. And I told someone recently, when you have meetings with children and their parents, children like that because they have a sense of freedom when they can talk and everybody's there. I think they feel somewhat protected. So the telehealth is really going to catch on. It's going to be used after COVID is over. And I do believe we will be through with COVID eventually. And it's going to be one of the standards that we're going to have to use. So we use it now. The paperwork for HIPAA rules are a little different, but it is available now. And the virtuals, we can, I volunteer in a community close to my home. I do that particularly with children of incarcerated parents. So I go and I have an area that's 6 feet from everybody else. They have to wear their mask and their gloves, and I only can do 5 at a time. So there are little ways that we can do things to make it work and make it better for the families and children that we serve. So telehealth and virtual is what we're doing.
Yeah.
Is what we're doing, and it's working. And I think people appreciate our efforts in connecting with them in that fashion.
Would love to hear, not on telehealth, but AJ, from you and the work that Saga is doing around, expanding the model to potentially have some virtual tutoring and weighing, if you want to weigh in on, the opportunities that leveraging technology creatively, like with the Liberation School effort that you brought up. If you guys want to speak to the, how that could be part of some of these solutions.
It's a great question. I mean, there's no doubt technology is going to play a significant role in helping us rethink growth and scale of personalization for students through online instruction and also through adaptive learning technology. And right now at Saga, we're exploring and having different randomized control research studies on some new permutations and models. And we're excited about potentially sharing that data in the next couple of years. But what's exciting about adaptive learning is that it offers you to have the best of both worlds. You have the cost effectiveness of the technology, but the relationship driven aspect of the human instruction, right? There's a saying that kids don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that really serves as the foundation to kind of unlocking student academic potential. And so the question is to what extent can the relationship with the tutor help inspire the students to take the time more seriously on the technology? And if the students are taking that time more seriously, can the data generated from that use help inform the in-person tutorial? And that's something we're interested in exploring right now. What's exciting about online instruction is that you're no longer constrained by geography. And so you dramatically open the pool of people who can serve and to rise to the occasion. And so that's one thing that's in particular that is exciting about online instruction. Also, it could open the door to give access to evidence-based programs for communities that may not have the opportunity to use evidence-based programs. I'm thinking about suburban and rural communities which oftentimes don't have access to philanthropic resources as a developed urban community. And so through online instruction, can we actually close the gap for use of evidence-based programs for schools and districts that aren't as big?
And I'll add too that the silver lining of all of the changes under circumstances of the pandemic is that we have rapidly changed into a new reality where what we were told wasn't possible before is suddenly possible. So even school, university education going full remote, working full-time remotely, therapy remotely only. Things that people were told were impossible before are now completely, everyone is on board and trying to make it happen. And so with providing counseling and socio-emotional support wellness, it's a moment of incredible opportunity in which we can actually have people who are ready to work with technology in that way, leading how this actually happens. You no longer have to fly in folks from other cities in order to be present at your session in order to hear their expertise. And so the communication is kind of limitless if people who are making these decisions and shaping these programs think in that way and look to people who are thinking in that way with an equity lens and centering the most marginalized folks. I think that a lot of breakthrough can happen, and especially like new ways of how we approach counseling in schools too. What if you just zoomed in like a healer and 500 students attended that session, and that happens regularly. And questions like that also address questions of budget and the consistent thing that there is no funding for activities and programs like these. But technology and access to it, if we do it right, can open the doors in new ways.
So we have another one here from the audience of how would an opportunity and counseling core, like a program like that, change the structures of schooling post-COVID? I can let whoever wants to jump in, and then I might take some moderator's privilege and offer my own thoughts.
Can you say it again, Neil?
Yes, it's how would a program like the opportunity and counseling core change the structures of schooling post COVID, so after we get through the current time of crisis?
I do say they're going to have an awful lot to do.
Yeah,
a tremendous amount of work. And I think I've been saying, I know for Walden, at the beginning when we came back, I think the last quarter, they were offering classes for students who graduated from high school and wanted to go to college and could not go for a year, to just so they wouldn't, lose track. And I've seen other colleges and universities that are talking about free and reduced tuition for those students. But I also think those students will need some mentoring to keep them focused and in that direction. Because for some students, I do a lot of work in the community. Students were packed up, ready to go to college. Some came back because COVID had taken over. So we're going to have to do an awesome job of supporting young people to continue mentoring, finishing college, and seeing the significance and importance of their success. Because right now, when you look at the depression, the trauma, DSM now even recognizes internet gaming disorder, because people are going to be home playing the games and all. We have a lot of mental health issues that are going to surface even greater than they already are. And we're going to have to be prepared for them professionally, which means training for people who are on the front lines of the front lines. AJ with his business, Thomas, Hui Ying, everybody's going to have to be doing things to prepare. And it's not like wait for it to happen. And I think that's one problem we all have. As a service provider, we already know what the potential for certain disorders are going to be. Trauma being the greatest, the depression. You're going to have the aggressive behaviors for lack of socialization. So we need to be ready, not crisis responsive, but ready, prepared with everything in a row, and have the grandest program we could imagine in our minds and on paper, so we can hit it and run. And so people won't lose out, because I was in a meeting a couple of weeks ago and they're saying we most likely will have 12-month school just to catch up and close that achievement gap. That's going to be another arena for stress. So we who sit here today are going to have to be the ones to partner to cover some of the holes that are there and plug them up with the idea of serving the populations that are going to be in need.
Thomas, go ahead.
I'll jump in and quickly add kind of a flip side to that, which is that, young people are under incredible stress right now, and practitioners are under incredible stress. And, we need to be providing supports for both the young people and adults, because this is just an incredibly challenging time for them. And I think that's going to be something we're going to see playing out. But, the good news is we have examples of meaning-based interventions, of trauma-informed schooling models that, that can be really effective even in these kind of contexts. And of course, the a lot of the young people who are from the most marginalized communities are also some of the most resilient and,
Yes.
and the best problem solvers in our country. So I also believe that we're going to get through this someday, and there is going to be a lot of work to do, but we can get there.
Yeah, there certainly is a lot of pressure right now, especially with those who have families as well, teachers who have small kids. I have a 4-year-old daughter. I'm very lucky she didn't come right now and throw some paint in my face in the middle of this, webinar. But I'm looking at this from the optimist in me is very excited about the future, because I think there's just going to be a wave of innovation across sectors as a result of COVID-19. We're going to see that in private sector. We're also going to see that in the government. And I think if we are very proactive and collaborating, having conversations like this, I expect a lot of really exciting changes in the foreseeable future. So thank you so much, Neil, for inviting me to participate in this discussion.
Yeah, and I want to thank all of you. We've got just a couple of minutes left, and I may take my moderator's privilege here and just add my own thoughts on that. I think how something like this could help change the structures is what we're realizing is that kids need more time with caring adults. And, I think there's a lot of hope that, schools have been struggling to adapt to incredible uncertainty with limited budgets and just this impossibly difficult situation. And the responses have been creative and stalled and uneven and wonderful. And my hope is that we can take time to learn some of the creative paths like telehealth, like how to connect students at more scale with great, tutors or teachers, or the kind of, healers that Hui-Ying was mentioning, and that we get more creative in how we use time and in schools, so that kids can, operate, independently or in larger groups when that's possible, but also with really dedicated time with adults that care about them and can invest in their success and help them, plan for what's next and be ready to take advantage of opportunities and access the opportunities. So, it is a brutally challenging year, but, hopeful that there are many lessons that can be learned, and, as long as we provide the needed resources to do that. And, that's my 2 cents. So thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you to the audience out there for your questions and for being with us. I really appreciate it. And I just want to say one final thing is the third event in our series of 5 is next Friday at 1 p.m. in our Quality Ed series. It's titled By Us, For Us, and it will discuss youth voice in education policy making. So we hope you're able to join us next week. And thank you to AJ, Thomas, Hui-Ying, and Renata for your expertise and your time today. I really appreciate it. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.